My name is Masato Otaka. I'm the Press Secretary of the Foreign Affairs, and we would like to start our periodic press conference regarding the COVID-19. Um, we have some speakers from the relevant ministries as usual. On my immediate right, we have Mr. UYAMA Tomochika UYAMA, who is from the Cabinet Secretariat, and he is the Director General in charge of Office for Coronavirus Disease 2019 Preparedness and Response. To his right, we have Mr. SAHARA Yasuyuki SAHARA from the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare. He is the Senior Assistant Minister for Global Health Ministers Secretariat. And to his right, we also have Mr. Umeda from the same ministry, Mr. Hiroshi Umeda, who is the Director of Infectious Disease Information Surveillance Office. To Mr. Umeda's right, we have Mr. Shikata from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Noriyuki Shikata, who is the Deputy Director General in charge of Consular Affairs. We also have, to his right, to Mr. Shikata's right, we have Mr. Seiji MATANO from the Immigration Services Agency under the Ministry of Justice. Mr. Seiji MATANO, he is the attorney as well as Deputy Director of Immigration Department. So we will try our best to answer all the questions that are posed today. And as usual, we also have viewers on internet. We're live streaming this, and the viewers on the online viewers will be able to submit their questions to us via email, and we will be happy to answer all the questions as well. Now, without further ado, I would like to start with the opening remarks from each of the representatives from the relevant ministries, starting with Mr. UYAMA from the Cabinet Secretariat. Mr. UYAMA.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. I'd like to make a few points at the beginning. The state of emergency in Japan, as you're aware, was lifted nationwide on May 25th, and the restrictions on economic and social activity were further eased on June 19th. People are now free to move between prefectures, and the process of reopening is accelerating, following careful guidelines and with a range of measures in place to prevent transmission of the novel coronavirus. As I explained at the press conference on June 1st, those measures include not only mask wearing and the meticulous hand washing, but also the pursuit of COVID-19 clusters using retrospective contact tracing, as recommended by medical experts, by engaging in a thorough public awareness campaign to teach people to avoid the so-called 3 C's, in Japanese sanmitsu, that are closed spaces, crowded places, and close contact settings with loud voice. So those are the main cause of clusters. We have achieved a degree of success in suppressing the spread of the virus. Going forward, we plan to continue with such prevention measures while strengthening testing capacity and carrying out testing in a strategic manner. With regard to PCR tests, the top priority is to ensure that appropriate tests, including antigen tests, are available quickly to anyone deemed by a doctor to require one. We are also moving to adopt the latest testing technology, including saliva-based PCR tests. Efforts to introduce drive-through and walk-through testing are proceeding nationwide. And we are taking steps to make testing easier and secure more testing centers. In addition, antigen tests that can deliver a result in just 30 minutes have been available at hospitals since May and beginning in June. And in beginning June, 26,000 test kits are being produced each day. A saliva-based antigen test has also been approved for use. All of this is in addition to an existing PCR testing capacity of more than 28,000 tests per day. In this way, we will work to further strengthen the testing system by combining new and existing technologies, such as antigen test kits and saliva-based PCR and antigen tests, so that whenever a doctor determines that a test is necessary, it can be performed quickly. The last point, as Minister Nishimura said yesterday, we started a new project addressing issues on COVID-19 by using artificial intelligence. Experts of virus and also artificial intelligence had a meeting yesterday to examine what would be the useful agenda for using AI. As you may be aware, supercomputer Fugaku of Riken's Institute of Physical and Chemical Research has attained #1 capacity in the world, and we are going to use the capacity of Fugaku for this purpose. Possible examples of the utilization of AI include the droplets infection simulation to find a way on how to organize concerts and other events in a safe manner. It can also help find how much risks of infection occur depending on the levels of human movement. So we are very much looking forward to seeing the development on this project as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Uyama. Now I would like to invite Mr. Sahara from the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare to make his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. My name is Sahara of the MHLW. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. As usual, we have prepared documents that should have been handed to you in advance. There are 5 points that we would like to cover. First of all, the epidemiological update. Second, the future policy for COVID-19 control. The third, fourth, and fifth points are somewhat specific. These are 3 sets of information that we wish to share with you. So from the first agenda item, if you could turn the page to begin with the epidemiological update. So far, 18,110 cases have been confirmed on cumulative basis. And as is known, the number of new infections is declining. Going to the next page. This is the table that we show on regular basis. At the moment, of the 18,000, there are still, as indicated at the bottom center, approximately 800 who are still hospitalized. 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, the number was higher, so there has been a clear decline. This is a positive trend, and it is necessary to further minimize this number. Those who have severe symptoms, that is indicated next to that block, is also declining. So as far as the first wave is concerned, we have placed the first wave under control to a certain extent. Next page. This is the daily trend of confirmed cases of PCR tests. End of May, the declaration for state of emergency was lifted and economic activity resumed gradually. And so far, we have not seen any surge of infections in Japan following the opening up of the society and economy, which we also appreciate as a positive trend. However, we cannot be complacent, and vigilance and caution is necessary. We must continue vigilance while we reopen the various areas of the society and economy. Next page. Now, this is the usual diagram that we show to you on regular basis, PCR test capacity and the actual number of tests performed. As mentioned by Mr. Uyama, we are taking measures to increase the capacity, and we now have the capacity of 28,000 PCR tests to be performed per day. But so far, we have not encountered the necessity to utilize 100% of the capacity, so we need to prepare ourselves for the next wave.
Next page, please. This is a chart that I've shown you before. The orange line shows PCR test positive rate. And this rate remains very low. So we have ample number of tests, while there is not that many patients out there. Of course, in some parts of the nation, there are some places where we see a big number of patients, but this is a nationwide trend. The second point I would like to focus on during my presentation is the future policy for COVID-19 control. There is nothing new in terms of the paper because I've shown you this paper before, but the next page is the point. We need to make sure that the new lifestyle takes hold in the Japanese society, and this is what we are focused on at the moment. Also, we have to be efficient in taking counter-cluster measures, and we are to enhance the efficiency of counter-cluster measures to guard against the next wave. Counter-cluster measures have played a key role in us overcoming the first wave, without doubt. And globally, our counter-cluster measures have been quite unique. And we should be ready to counter the next possible next wave, and we will be focusing on how to make this counter-cluster measures more efficient. And immediately below that, Public Health Center. We need to fully support the public health centers. They are performing very important roles, and they have personnel. And it is true that the public health centers have been under strain. Therefore, we are committed to further strengthen the public health centers' capacities. When it comes to a medical system, obviously we need to strengthen a medical system, and local governments need to come up with solid plans to enhance their medical systems. Public health centers and medical systems both have to be strengthened, and on the 19th of June, MHLW asked the local governments in the form of a guideline so that the public health centers and medical system can be enhanced, and the local governments will take necessary steps and come up with a plan by the end of July. By doing so, I believe we'll be well positioned to counter the next potential wave. The third point is development of treatment, of vaccines, and updating of test methodologies. Those are necessary, and we'll continue to focus on those measures. And some of these points I will be referring to during the second half of my presentation. I would like to skip one page and move on to the third point of my presentation. This is about the COCOA contact confirming application. We work with Cabinet Secretariat and was launched on the 19th of June. When the two smartphones are within 1 meter for 15 minutes or longer, then each of these smartphones will record a history of contacts, of the contact. And the history of contact will remain only within his or her handset terminal. smartphone, and this information the history will not be released outside of the handset. So both individuals will not be able to tell, or the nation, the government will not be able to tell when, with whom, where the contact was made. If and when there is a person who tested positive and the person was registered with the public health centers, and if the person who's tested positive enters that information, then those with handset with information record of contact with this positive person will get a notification. This is a new mechanism which is now available. And I'm sure that this can be effective in taking measures against clusters. The fourth point I would like to cover, again skipping one page, is on antibody test results. During the first week of June, blood tests were conducted to test for antibody in Tokyo, Osaka, and Miyagi Prefecture, where we see less patients. And a total of 3,000 residents were randomly selected, 3,000 from Miyagi. And emergency use permission by FDA was given to these test methodologies, as you can see. In the case of Tokyo, 0.1% of the tested individuals had antibody, Osaka 0.17%, and Miyagi 0.03%. Those were the results. These numbers are very low in our understanding. Similar tests have been conducted in different countries, but in comparison to those results, the results that we have in front of us for Japan is quite low. March, April, during the press conferences that we had in March and April, I know that there was a suspicion that the actual number of patients were higher, but this result shows that we were right in saying that the number of patients in Japan was relatively small. Let me turn to point number 5, which talks about a new testing. This is not PCR tests. This is antigen testing. 1 month ago or so, antigen testing was commercialized, but this antigen testing is the latest antigen testing. And the key here is that in comparison to conventional antigen testing, sensitivity is higher, and this can be used just like PCR testing. And nasopharyngeal specimen, in addition to nasopharyngeal specimen, saliva can be also used as a specimen for this particular test. That makes this testing rather unique, and it only takes about 30 or so minutes to get the results. And there already are 800 test equipments, and these test equipments have been used for testing other viruses, non-coronaviruses. That is why the testing equipments are already available, so the existing infrastructure can be used, and 100 or so testing can be conducted per hour. So in addition to PCR testing, I believe this new antigen testing will contribute in enhancing further the testing capacity in this country. We don't know, nobody knows when the next wave will be. What is important that is we continue to strive to enhance the capacity of testing, and not in terms of the number of PCR tests, but we also need to enhance our testing capacity by introducing antigen testing, and not just nasopharyngeal, but saliva being used as specimen. So we need to diversify the variety of testing so that a variety of testing methodologies can be made available so that we can be fully ready for the next potential wave. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sahara. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Shikata, who is the Deputy Director General on Consular Affairs, Foreign Ministry, to make his opening remarks.
Good evening. I'd like to explain to you the paper distributed under the title of Phase Measures Toward Resuming Cross-Border Travel. And this is something that the Japanese government announced on the 18th of this month, last week, based on decision of the National Security Council and COVID-19 headquarters. Let me just go through briefly what has been decided and the basic orientation of the Japanese government toward resuming cross-border travel. Foreign Minister Motegi has been engaging with foreign ministers of Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, and Thailand. And this is something we have been consulting with 4 countries. And this is not limited to 4 countries. For the moment, we are trying to come up with a basic framework for resuming cross-border travel. And this framework is targeted at business travelers and others. We have already started consultations with the 4 countries for this purpose. And the Japanese government intends to add another countries or regions under this framework. This is, at this point of time, this is a kind of pilot program. And we are assuming that based on this pilot program, we'll be able to expand our program into other countries and regions. And in terms of deciding our partner countries or regions, we take into account the status of infections of COVID-19, both inside Japan and outside of Japan. And when we talk about business travelers and others, we are referring to such categories of workers as business managers, engineers, technical intern trainees, and specified skilled workers, for example. Of course, this measure needs to be based on protection of public health in Japan. And we are keeping the ongoing PCR testing. At the same time, we are consulting with the countries concerned in terms of presenting a certificate of the result of a pre-entry PCR, before they arrive in Japan, and keeping location data for 14 days after entry into Japan. This is the kind of idea that we are having in terms of taking additional quarantine measures to protect public health concerns in Japan. And also, we are asking visitors to Japan under this framework submission of a schedule of activities in Japan, meaning they may go to their office, and so they may move between their residence in Japan to the workplace, but we want to limit the movement of those people for the time being. And second page, we are also talking about exit from Japan by Japanese nationals, and this is also applicable to Japanese nationals, basically business persons who are visiting those 4 countries. We need to carry out this framework, the project, based on expansion of testing capacity in Japan. And this means when we are talking about testing capacity, for the time being, we are talking about PCR testing. But as our colleagues from MHLW mentioned, we are trying to look into introducing alternative testing methods, such as PCR testing using saliva samples. So we are hoping, that the new alternative testing measures may provide additional opportunities for expansion of this program. And we need to keep in mind that our measures would be compatible with the infection control measures in Japan. And as you know, even today, we are seeing expansion of infections around the world, not only in developing countries, but also in developed countries. So we need to go kind of step by step, gradual approach, and we need to be attentive, to the possible, impacts of our new program. So this is something we've got started, and we'll see, how far we can go in terms of gradual or phased measures in terms of our new approaches. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shikata. And last but not least, we have Mr. Matano from the Immigration Services Agency. Mr. Matano, please.
Hi.
Thank you very much. I will be talking about the refusal of landing and the exceptions. COVID-19 continues to spread on global basis, and the Justice Minister says that for foreign nationals who have record of residing in other countries, they would be deemed as people who fall under Article 5, Paragraph 1, Item 14 of the Immigration Control Act, and they would be subject to denial of landing. However, for exceptional cases, people will be allowed to enter. And the special examples of cases where permission for re-entry may be granted is uploaded on the MOJ website. We have handed out to you 2 documents. One is the document dated May 27th. On page 2, in the footnote, permanent resident, spouse or child of Japanese national, spouse or child of permanent resident, or long-term resident. So those are the 4 categories of foreign nationals that are subject to this system. It's rather complicated, so let me simplify. Those who have either of those 4 residential status, if they had departed from Japan to those destinations before the refusal of landing became into place, they are allowed re-entry. And also, as indicated in note number 3, for cases where humanitarian consideration is necessary, then re-entry could be granted as special case. At the MOJ, in the midst of refusal for landing being subject to a higher scope of regions and countries and with higher request for re-entry. Based upon the various cases and requests, we have actually uploaded information on our website on specific examples of cases where permission of re-entry may be granted based upon our experience and track record. And that has been summarized in the document handed out to you dated June 12th. So far, some cases of re-entry granting had been done on specific examples. Family staying in Japan and family becoming separated, having a child who is enrolled in Japanese educational institution and the child is unable to go to school because re-entry had not been permitted, and people who need to re-enter Japan for treatment in Japanese medical institution for surgery or childbirth, people who left Japan to visit a relative who was in critical condition abroad or to attend the funeral of a deceased relative, someone who had to depart from Japan for treatment at foreign medical institution for surgery or childbirth, or people who had to depart from Japan after receiving summons from foreign court to appear as witness. Those are some of the examples. Even if the case does not directly fall into these specific cases, the situation may be considered and re-entry may be granted.
As far as we at the MOJ are concerned, we would like to make everything possible to make sure that we have concrete border control measures in place, and we would like to take appropriate measures for specific cases.
Questions from the participants and the viewers, and perhaps I should start with questions from those of you in the conference room with us. Any questions, please?
Jake Sturmer from ABC Australia. Do you have any time frame for when those entry restrictions may be eased for those 4 countries? And extending and looking forward to tourists from those 4 countries, do you think they'll be allowed in by ski season, for example?
Thank you. So that'll be a question for Mr. Shikata.
Well, thank you very much for your question. We are, as I mentioned, we are consulting with 4 countries, and our take is that because we are talking to those 4 countries separately, the timing of kind of agreement would be different. And I guess, for example, Australian case, I understand that there are probably still restrictions inside the movement inside Australia, I understand. So we take into account individual situations of those countries, and when we reach agreement, then that new arrangement will enter into force. So, but at the same time, we wish to kind of realize the results or agreements as soon as possible. And also, we are interested in kind of moving on to the next stage, as I mentioned. And as for tourists, Foreign Minister Motegi mentioned, that so these 4 countries is more focused on business, so-called business track, and also there is a kind of residence, track, and the next stage, there will be people like exchange, students, for example, foreign students, coming to Japan, or tourists. But of course, when we are talking about welcoming tourists to Japan, there would be more challenging issues. So it's going to be phased stages, and it's going to be affected, as I understand, by the status of spread of infections across the world, and also the testing capacity, and also like issues like vaccine. So we need to take into account various elements when we get to the issues of tourists. But as you are aware, we have been putting a lot of priority to having foreign visitors to Japan. So we are attentive to this aspect. Thank you.
Okay, does that answer your question? Okay. Any others from the floor? Okay, I saw Robin, please.
Robin Harding from the Financial Times. Another question on travel. Your framework assumes that coronavirus is under control in a country before you allow travel. But it seems quite clear that in some countries, coronavirus will continue to circulate and will never be brought down to the low levels in countries like Thailand, Vietnam, New Zealand, and Australia. So do you have any plans to be able to open up to travel from places where coronavirus is circulating? And related to that, how do you plan to conduct the Olympics next year if there is no free access to Japan? Thank you.
Okay, Shikata-san, would you like to take that question too?
So it is true that for our first pilot project, the 4 countries that I mentioned, the situation of infection of coronavirus in those 4 countries is under control. So our current framework is to take into account the current level of infection. But as you correctly mentioned, we have the Olympics and Paralympics, that we are hosting in our mind. So at this point of time, this is an early stage, and we need to assess how our initial pilot project would be realized, and of course, we are also attentive to, for example, what the European Union members or Schengen members are doing in terms of border control measures. So we, as government, we are committed, to hosting a successful, Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics, and we are hopeful, that by that time, the global COVID-19 situations would be under control, and we will be able to facilitate, visitors, coming to Japan, by that time.
Okay, I hope that answers your question. Okay, I saw 2 more people who wanted to. Yes, please.
ラジオフランスの特派員カリン
Karen Nishimura, Radio France correspondent. I have one question. It's a clarification. Restrictions on re-entry to Japan. For example, I have a French nationality. For example, if I had to go to France tomorrow and come back to Japan 1 week later, I have 2 sons, and I accompany my 2 sons for this travel. When we come back to Japan, since I'm a French national, I will not be allowed to re-enter. But my son has a Japanese national passport, so my son will be able to re-enter Japan because my sons have Japanese passport. The travel history is the exact same, but depending on which passport you have, the decisions and judgment could differ. And what are the reasons to justify such difference in decision?
Mr. Matano, and maybe Shikata-san. And before we go into we go into your answers, we also have another question coming from Motoko Rich of New York Times, which is quite similar. Her question is, will Japan consider allowing permanent residents in Japan to re-enter after traveling abroad, or is it just for special circumstances?
はい。
The Coverage of Immigration Control Act is for those who have foreign nationalities. For entry for Japanese nationals, there is no restrictions whatsoever. Customary law, international customary law, has allowed that globally. So, under the Immigration Control Act of Japan, there is no restriction on the entry of Japanese nationals, but foreign nationals entering into Japan, the government has can exercise judgment. So, in response to your question, if you are a French national, you will not be able to enter. You will not be able to re-enter. But for Japanese nationals, under the Immigration Control Act of Japan, there will be no restriction whatsoever. Therefore, the Japanese nationals will be allowed to re-enter or enter, as a matter of fact. But when you depart Japan, you will be explained that that you will not be allowed to re-enter. And if there is an absolute need for you to travel abroad with the risk of not being able to re-enter, we are giving thorough explanations upon departure. If that is the case, foreign nationals are being discriminated. That is my understanding. You're discriminating foreign nationals. What would be your response to that? There is no scientific reason, foundation to justify that. What would be your response to that? We are same humans, and we are the same humans despite different nationalities, and the risk of infection is the same, no matter which nationality you are. But for Japanese nationals, as I've said repeatedly, under the Japanese Immigration Control Act, there is no restriction for entry and re-entry. Japanese nationals are not restricted, and as a result of that, there are some differences.
Just to make sure, for clarification's sake, Motoko Rich has asked whether it would just be for special circumstances or otherwise that the permanent residents will be able to re-enter. Could you answer that question as well, Matano-san?
As I said previously, for permanent residents, for those who have been given the status of permanent resident, if the departure had been prior to the designation of the region as region subject to landing refusal, then we allow for re-entry as a specific example or case. On the other hand, if the departure had been after designation as a place of refusal of entry, even if the person has permanent resident status, at the moment we do not allow for re-entry. And I said this before, but why are we differentiating the measures as such? Those who departed Japan prior to the designation departed when the place was not designated, and they were disabled from re-entry because the designation took place thereafter. But those who depart Japan after designation of the place as subject to refusal of landing, say you travel to France after designation of France, and your departure was after the Japanese government declared that you will not be able to re-enter. So we are on the assumption that such a person departed from Japan knowing that re-entry would not be allowed. And upon departure, full explanation of that is provided to that person. And if there is a special situation that requires that person to depart anyway, then we listen to the reasons why, as special cases. So that is how the system is built.
Obviously, this is a question that's attracting a lot of interest and concern. Anything else that some other participants wishes to add? Shikata-san, would you like to add anything? Nothing in particular? Okay, please.
Please use the microphone.
あの
Let me add to Mr. Matano-san's comment. France is level 3. We've designated France as level 3, and under these circumstances, as far as the GOJ is concerned, countries, level 3 countries and regions, we are asking people not to travel to level 3 countries, and that is the very basic, at the very basic basis. The situation of infections in countries and regions, as we see improvements in the circumstances of infections in countries and regions, these conditions could evolve and change. I'm not here to say when the level will be reduced from level 3 to lower levels. I cannot anticipate when this will happen. But the risk of infection, as the risk of infection becomes lower, we could go back to a situation where we did not have coronavirus around. Immigration Services Agency, ISA, earlier on, we talked about the specific examples of special exceptional circumstances, and that's available on their webpage, ISA's webpage. And the phone numbers are available for you to contact. And humanitarian considerations will be taken into consideration, and that there is a clear message that they will take into consideration humanitarian considerations as well. But what I wanted to say is that the current situation, we need to see a change. The current situation, it's not that the current situation will never change. GOJ has been receiving requests from Western countries, and these requests from other countries will be taken into full consideration. And while working to promote international cooperation, we want to control infections, and that will be necessary going forward. And from that perspective, we will closely communicate with individual countries, including France. And in the case of France, we will also be communicating thoroughly with the EU.
His hand.
Hi. Rocky Swift with Reuters. I'd like to ask about COVID-19 treatments, specifically Gilead's remdesivir. Yesterday there was a report that drug could be sold for up to $5,000 per dose in the U.S. I know that Japan got a portion of Gilead's large donation of this drug a month or so back. Can you comment on what are the remaining stockpiles of that drug in Japan, if any? And if you run out, would Japan have any plan to purchase more of that drug in particular? And as a kind of follow-up, besides remdesivir, can you give a general comment about other treatments or drugs that are being used in Japan at present? Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps that would be for Mr. Sahara. And if Mr. Umeda wishes to chip in as well, by all means do so.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. On remdesivir, In the United States, Gilead is producing the drug, and Japan has imported remdesivir and have been allocated to medical institutions that are providing treatment to COVID-19 patients in a concentrated manner. How much in volume has been sent to Japan? Because of various circumstances, we have not disclosed that information, so we would like to solicit your kind understanding to that extent. And on treatments and drugs, for the time being, we have not heard of any problems with regards to significant shortfall or shortage. Thank you.
Okay, by all means.
Sorry. Could you just comment also on other drugs, such as there was a steroid drug called dexamethasone, for example, that's been said to be promising. Avigan, which is still in the studies. Can you give just a rundown maybe of what drugs or treatments Japan is seeing as promising and are using in clinics? Thank you.
Okay, Sahara-san, can you take that on?
Thank you very much. Dexamethasone is 1 week ago in the UK was reported of clinical trial results that efficacy was shown. So it's being used in the UK, or we discovered that such results were delivered. Dexamethasone in Japan has been conventionally used in various treatments. So at the moment, how should I put it? We're not troubled because of shortage. At least MLHW is not aware of any such situation. And further, new drug or research and development of new drugs are underway. Various clinical trials are underway. This applies to Avigan and Fusan or Actemra. Various clinical trials are underway. Results have not yet been obtained, but on global basis, various treatments and drugs are being tried out. So, Japan would like to continue to make efforts.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sahara. Perhaps I should be moving on to questions coming from the online viewers as well. We have questions from Walter Sim of the Straits Times. And actually, we have a similar question coming from Motoko Rich of New York Times as well. And this is as follows. How concerned are you by the rise in cases in Tokyo, which recorded 55 cases yesterday and 48 cases today? And this is a question by Motoko Rich as well. She asked, how concerned are you about recent spikes in Tokyo of COVID infections? But then again, Walter Sim goes on further to talk about how concerned are you by the recent clusters in Kitakyushu and Otaru. He goes on further to ask, you said there has not been any surge, but surely there are concerns over numbers that have not been seen in 1.5 months. Perhaps this would be a question for Sahara-san as well as Mr. Uyama.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think there'll be comments further by Mr. Sahara after myself. And generally, as you're aware, the virus is still in town, and as far as the virus is there always a risk of cases of infections. So, so we have to. There's always a concern. Concerns never diminish for the time being. And also, we are in the process of reopening economic and social activities. So that is something we are doing under certain guidelines and measures. So there's always chances for the virus to spread. And also, we are doing our countermeasures as well. Our local health centers are doing their work every day. Try to find a link, what they call the retrospective tracing method, and try to find the hidden clusters. So I think they're doing quite a good job, although not always 100% is find a link, but I heard majority of the cases they are finding a link. So that is something we have to have in mind. And in addition, there are also elements of recent new elements. One is the, as I have said, we are enhancing the capacity of tests, and also we are sort of in the process of reopening the business and social activities. And there are certain cases of high-risk situations. For example, even without any symptoms, if there's a search for retrospective tracing, and you find some people who have close contacts, and these days there are many cases of active testing, and as a result, there are cases coming out of people who don't have any symptoms but positive. And those numbers actually are found these days, so added to the number of the cases. And there are some cases where there are certain high risks where found in some areas in Tokyo where something like a nightlife activities are going on. And also there are some cases there's voluntary cooperation of active testing. And as a result, there are some people who are found positive. And so those are kind of encouraging situations in a sense. So, so we have to look at those different elements. But again, as far as virus is there's a concern, always concern, and we have to do our best to tackle them to under control. Should I ask this? Not yet? Okay, thank you.
Okay, then Sahara-san, please.
Let me talk about the case in Kitakyushu. As you mentioned during your question, there was a surge in the number of cases at elementary schools and hospitals and senior citizens facilities in the first half of June. But since the 20th of June, no new cases has been reported. No positive cases has been reported since 20th of June. So I think Kitakyushu has overcome one wave. So the situation is controlled in Kitakyushu. The case of Tokyo has been already explained by Mr. Uyama.
We have another question from Walter Sim. It's regarding another aspect of the lifting of the restrictions, and it refers to domestic travel increases. Could you assess the risk of COVID-19 being spread to rural regions as domestic travel increases?
Thank you very much again for this question. I think it's a very similar answer to this question. As far as the virus there, again, there's always a risk of transmission. And if we have zero contacts with the people, there will be zero risk. But our life needs to be reopened and step by step activated. So including the travel of from one prefecture to another, that's been our restriction been lifted. So theoretically, of course, there's a risk of virus spreading, but at the same time, Japanese people are very aware where the kind of behavior of risks. So everybody understands very careful to try to avoid such high risk behaviors, including try to avoid 3 C's. Crowded places, close places, and close contacts with loud voice, and conversation with very near to each other. So those kind of behavior is being sort of well understood, and also again there's a countermeasures of retrospective tracing by the local health centers. They are doing a very good job. I think we have to do our best to contain this spread while step by step accelerating our activities. And so there's a certain risk, but also we are sort of doing our best to contain such risks.
Is there anything you'd like to?
No, I'm in complete agreement. If there's anything to add, in comparison to February or March, the Japanese people's recognition of the risk of infection has become elevated. People are wearing facial masks. People are avoiding the 3C environment. So people are being extremely careful. So of course, there remains the risk of spread of infection, but at the same time, I think we can also be a bit assured.
Okay, Uyama-san, you'd like to add something?
And I think also there's compared with the a couple of months ago, I think there has been a lot of preparations also for like hospitals, clinics, and to try to enhance the capacity for this medical capacity. So that's also another countermeasures that give people a certain level of comfort in terms of tackling this COVID-19.
Okay, thank you, Uyama-san. We have another question coming from Alistair Gale of the Wall Street Journal. And this might actually be for Mr. Sahara as well as maybe Mr. Shikata as well. For business travelers going from Japan to other countries under the proposed guidelines, how and where would they get a PCR test before leaving, given that such tests are generally restricted to people who are sick with COVID-19 symptoms?
はい、
Thank you very much. For PCR tests, as you've pointed out, basically, PCR tests are available at hospitals and clinics for those with symptoms. However, for Japanese travelers undergoing test before or departure, we will have a separate scheme for them. For example, travel clinics, so-called travel clinics, and health centers of business establishments will be conducting PCR tests. We've always had travel clinics where Japanese nationals will go before traveling to Africa to get vaccinations. So travel clinics have always been available in Japan. So travel clinics and health centers of business establishments will be performing these tests. So it's going to be a separate scheme. That's all. Thank you.
To add, nothing in particular? Okay. So we've exhausted all the questions coming from the online viewers. Or maybe not. Okay, I overlooked one part of questionnaires from Motoko Rich of New York Times, and perhaps this is for Shikata-san once again. Europe has recently indicated that it will not be letting in travelers from the U.S. anytime soon. Is Japan thinking along the same lines?
Well, at this point of time, we are not accepting kind of casual international tourists or travelers from the United States. But as I mentioned, we are trying to look into the possibility of coming up with a business track, or as we mentioned, for those special reasons or circumstances, we would take into account individual situations. So I guess what the European countries may be discussing may not directly apply to our situation, and we are hopeful that the situations both in the United States and European countries would improve, and we will be able to engage with those countries. Although we have been communicating with both the United States and Europe. But as I mentioned, the first the pilot project is applicable to those 4 countries that I mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shikata-san. Looks as though we have truly exhausted the questions from the online viewers. And any more questions from those of you in the room? Okay, Rocky.
Thank you. Rocky Swift at Reuters. I wondered if you could give an update on the more information on the tracking app, COCO. Do you have any numbers on the number of downloads so far? And is there a critical number that you need to hit so that it accurately captures the population? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rocky-san. Sara-san, do you have answers for this?
はい、まずこの
Thank you. This app is a beta version, trial version. And the trial version was launched on the 16th of June. As of yesterday, 4,170,000 downloads there were. There was a glitch of sort, and I know that this has caused inconveniences. We would like to remedy the glitch so that more people can be able to use this app as soon as possible. Thank you.
Target figures?
はい、
We do not have any specific target as of today. We want to make as many people as possible to use this app. there is no specific target. We are asking as many people as possible to use this.
Questions from the floor? If not, perhaps this is the time for us to conclude this conference. Thank you so much for your attention, as well as your patience with our answers. And I would also like to thank all the participants as well. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future as well. But for now, goodbye, everybody. Good night.